Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Welcome back to Just Before Bed, our chapter book reading for the summer. As I said, this book has quite a few chapters in it. It's rather long, so this is actually night number 6. We're going to extend it a little bit so that we get all of the books in. We don't want the nights to be too long for you. So let's get reading. In chapter 20, For a Kingdom. Look at them, Mom. It's almost like they're flying, Ifgard hooted as we caught our first glimpse of the hawk. Indeed it was. The sky seemed to sizzle on this nearly moonless night with iridescent jolts of light as dozens upon dozens of Killian snakes leaped from the cliff. It would be impossible to pick Hoke out from the hundreds of snakes that shimmered in the night air, but that was not what occupied me at the moment. I was studying their descent as they plunged. Some floated down slowly, others fell at a blistering speed toward the churning waters beneath them. They evidently had ways of controlling their speed. How could this be? They had none of the arsenal of feathers we had to shape the winds beneath our wings. They couldn't shift spoiler flaps into gears as we could to slow for landing. How could they do it? For they were just long, vertical, wingless, legless, slithering tubes covered in scales. Their shape alone defined such possibilities. Slow down and enjoy it, Yensi, someone hissed. I believe it was a certain Luzali, but I couldn't be sure. I watched the snake carefully. Didn't your mom ever tell you not to stare? She hissed at me as she drifted through the air in a slow dive. Oh, sorry. I was just so fascinated at how you can adjust the speed of your descent. This seemed to please her. Well, glad you appreciate it. My son down there doesn't get at all the finer points of diving yet. It's all just a quick plunge for him. Look at the pretty designs we can make. With that, she curled herself into a tangled triple loop and scrolled the night with shimmering hues of blue against the blackness. For a moment, it was as if she was nearly still, as if she had stopped the world for a long, languorous hover. I noticed a collar-like ruff of scales that had extended from her neck. It wasn't dissimilar from the secondary set of scales that I noticed on Hoke when he had smashed the rock so long ago. You see, she said as she coiled herself into a double helix, we can lighten our bodies. How do you do that? Hordo knows, she said. It's connected with breathing. And then these. The scales on her ruffs shimmered as she fanned them out, and her speed slowed. Are they like wings? I wondered. This was enormously fascinating to me. The snake's name was Dylan. She invited my mom, Ifgar, and me to her nost. Where's the young'un we saw diving with you, Mom asked. Hordo knows. Who's Hordo? Ifgar asked. I was mortified by his question, but Dylan shrugged it off. Hordo, dear, my mother said, is the Killian snake spirit. We have Glocks, our spirit. They have Hordo. But ours is better, right? Mom and I both gasped. I was horrified, but Mom replied sweetly, Ifgar, there's no such thing as a better spirit. It's not a competition. A croaking sound issued from Dylan's throat, the sound of a Killian snake laughter. Oh, goodness, you owls are so curious. What would you like to know, young'un? She said to me. Lots, ma'am, I said. Ifgar cocked his head. Mercifully, he remained silent, but I saw the questions in his eyes. She's a snake. Why did you call her ma'am, like she's important? The words might as well have been spoken, and I saw a glare rise up in Dylan's slitted eyes. First of all, what species of Killian are you? I asked. I'm not a nest maid, she replied sharply, and then, as if to put a finer point to it, she showed a bit of fang. There has never been a nest maid in our family. I am a cerulean Luzali with a touch of cobalt. As she said the word cobalt, a silvery blue seemed to flash through her scales. The cobalt is mostly visible on bright sunny days or under a full moon. A torrent of questions poured from me. How long could a snake hold its breath underwater? What were those scales that flared like a ruff to slow her plunge? My extended scale plates, or ESPs as we call them. We talked for several minutes before my mom said, Lize, don't you think you've asked enough questions? We don't want to wear our host out. Just one more question. Go ahead, young'un, Dylan said. All right, I know you've never served as a nestmaid, but have you ever thought of any other kind of service? For owls, she asked. Her eyes slitted, revealing only a glowing line of luminous cobalt. For the kingdom, I replied quietly. Chapter 21, General Andricus Speaks. On my first day back on Darkfowl, I found myself in General Andricus Tybo Alba's hollow with his topmost advisors explaining my ideas for a new-fangled fighting force. The unit would be very small compared to most commando units, I explained. How small is small? The general asked. 12, no more. 12, Captain Nilla Macrathene Whitney exclaimed. She was an elf owl who had distinguished herself in the Frostbeaks unit as a superb strategist. Yes, Captain. They were all looking at me very skeptically, except for the general. They would only be more incredulous when I revealed my plans for Killian snakes. I thought I might as well get that over with quickly. Small, but a mix of species, I added. The owls in attendance all blinked. There was derisive snorts and hisses. Let him finish. General Andreas shushed them with a wave of his port wing. I proposed using killing snakes, mostly as ground troops. This wasn't entirely accurate, but I didn't want to startle them with the idea of snakes in flight on the backs of owls. There was complete and utter silence, but their air reeked with contempt. And I suppose he has a role for, let us guess, white-footed mice? An ancient barred owl muttered under his breath. I knew this was my biggest problem, getting these owls to begin to think of Killian snakes as actual soldiers and not just mindless rock crunchers or honers. I stole a glance at the general. He seemed lost in deep thought, his white, heart-shaped face as blank as a pale winter sky. When at last he swiveled his head towards me, there was a shimmer in his black eyes that snuffed out the din of scornful whispers. And have you thought of what such a unit might be called? I felt a calm creep through my gizzard, which had been fraught with tension. He's with me, I thought. The general is with me, and the name came to me. I'm not sure from where. I took a step closer to him and spoke in a strong voice. The Glock Speed Unit, sir. His black eyes brightened. And a fine name it is, Glock Speed. What do you say to a division? Everyone gasped. General Andreas swiveled his head to fix each owl in the small assemblance with his fierce, dark gaze. A division composed of several of these hyper-maneuverable units. Together, we could call them the Glock Speed Division. But, sir, Captain Nilja began to sputter. He's just a young'un, a barred owl interrupted. He doesn't even graduate until when? Sophonisson, I said softly. I was completely confused. Certain General Articus had not suggested that I command a division. He must have read my mind, for he turned to me and said, Listen to me, Lize of Kiel. I started, as did everyone else, for he did not address me as Cadet Lize Megascops. This was an egregious departure from protocol. I was almost dizzy now with the confusion. I felt all eyes settling upon me in anticipation of what General Andreas was about to say. I am not suggesting that you lead this division at all. You don't have the experience in the field. Yet. But you have an idea. You picture all this in your mind's eye. Do you not, lad? Yes, sir. I suppose I do. You flew out and rescued Orf, a small unit of mixed species, rescued the best blacksmith in the northern kingdoms. The general lofted himself into a higher perch and paused until a hush enveloped the hollow. It was so quiet that as I watched a plummel fall from the cantankerous barred owl, I swore I could hear it touch the floor. You see, my friends, the general continued in a gentler tone, we're at a critical juncture in the war. The war is changing and it's coming closer to home. I have just been informed of 3 more attacks on peaceful communities. He paused again. I cannot make this clear enough, his voice swelled. We are losing. As of this moment, the Ice Talon Leagues has gained more territory than they have lost to us. By Sophonisson, our slipgizzles tell us the front will be here at Darkfowl Island. Balearic is planning a massive invasion, and he and his forces will fly on west and south. Yes, it's true. They've set their sights on the southern kingdoms, on Ga'Hoole. I felt a darkness fill my gizzard. It began to twist and twitch. The Elfowl Captain Nilja staggered on her tiny feet. Ga'Hoole, someone whispered. General Andreas flipped his head. The great tree itself, and we're all that stands between them, he said quietly. Cadet Lies has seen over the murky horizon, a horizon stained by the blood and smoke of old methods of combat. We need new, young, flexible minds, quick with imagination to invent new strategies if we are to have any chance. And that is exactly what Cadet Lies, Cadet Loki, Cadet Lil, Cadet Blix, Cadet Moss, and the Master's Apprentice, Cadet Thora, can offer. The success of this division depends not simply on training, however, but on secrecy and surprise. I cannot emphasize that enough. Secrecy and surprise. The Ice Talons must never know what's coming if we're to retain any advantage. So you are elevating these young cadets to the rank of division and battery officers? A spotted owl asked with more than a tinge of contempt. No, not now, Major Finn Strix Occidentalis, but soon. For now, they shall become instructors in this new form of fighting. We need to have this division ready by spring. We must be able to meet Balearic's invasion with hidden strength. Balearic plans to be here where I perch. His eyes bore into the spotted owl. Let that sink in, he seemed to be saying. Imagine a tyrant on this perch. Lies, he said. Tonight, a new cadet arrives, a certain Cadet Strumagen Strix. The daughter of Commander Strix Hearth, who used to teach here, someone asked. The very same. But she was a terrible problem to her parents, disobedient, disinterested in her studies, the spotted owl began to stutter. And now, distinguished, General Andreas said coldly, leveling those impossible dark eyes that looked like dead coals in his white face. Yes, Major Finn Strix Occidentalis, she was not fit for entry into the academy here. She had to go to the second-rate school, Gareth's Keep, up by Little Hoole. But 2 evenings ago, we received a falcon messenger with the news that an earthquake in the region had destroyed the remaining walls of the fortress there, making Little Hoole vulnerable. Wave upon wave of Ice Talon units stormed the breach. Apparently, under the most unimaginably terrible conditions, this young owl, whom everyone had always thought was a huge disappointment, the general lingered on the last word so that the sound of it seemed to sizzle through the chamber. She drove them off. This cadet acquitted herself with unmatched courage and with force into a seemingly untenable position, managed to fend off a much larger enemy force. She will be invaluable to the formation of the Glockspeed Division. And then, under his breath, perhaps so as not to offend the older owls who were gathering in the hollow, he muttered, "We need bold, new owls with bold, new ideas." Glockspeed Division. The words rang in my ears and rattled my gizzard. I was still dizzy from all the general had said. I was not to be an officer, at least not yet, but I was to be an instructor. This seemed to me an even more daunting promotion. How did one transform oneself from student to teacher that quickly? By Sophonisson, that was the deadline, for that was when the fight would arrive here at Darkfowl Island. The image of Lysa as a small dark lump on the snow came back to me in all its horror. The soot on her tawny new feathers seemed to stain the whole world. The rumors about Balearic abounded. Some said he was part Hagfield, that beneath the white plumage of a snowy there were the dark feathers of the ancient hag owls who had practiced Notchmagan in the time of the legends. If that was so, what good would my new-fangled ideas and strategies do? My strategies were based on logic, developing a keen sense of the weather, advanced in weapons, and most of all, faith in ordinary creatures being trained to do extraordinary things. And faith was not magic. The idea of a small unit had been tested in a limited way when we rescued Orf, but limited was the key word here. There had been 6 of us. Now we were talking about an entire division made up of many smaller units, each very specialized in a new way, yet able to work together when needed. Loki, Blix, Moss, Lil, and I, the 5 of us together, must show the others. Chapter 22, Strumagen Strix. If I had pictured a romantic reunion with Lil, I was to be disappointed. When I found her in the eastern barracks where the female cadets were billeted, she was in a small hollow with none other than the distinguished cadet Strumagen Strix. I was just telling Strix Struma, she likes to be called that, about the rescue of Orf and our ideas. The spotted owl looked at me, nodded her head very respectfully, and said in a quiet voice, "Brilliant, just brilliant. If I'd had a mid-flight reload during the attack on Gareth's Keep, what I could have accomplished." "I understand that you did plenty as it was," I replied. Strixstruma was much younger than I expected, younger than Lil or me. Obviously, she was some sort of child prodigy, and I liked her immediately. There was a keenness in her gaze, and I liked the set of her feathers. "So how did it go with the generals?" Lil asked. "Moss caught me up on things and told me you were with him to discuss a new unit." "Well, yes. The good news is the general really likes my ideas, and we have a name for it. There's just one little problem. It's not exactly a unit, Lil. It's a division. The Glock Speed Division." Soon we were all making a list. "All right," Strixstruma said. "In the Killian League, a division is made up of 300 to 500 owls, so we begin with that." "Owls," I said rather vaguely. "That's a bit limiting." "What do you mean, Lies?" Lil asked. Strixstruma looked slightly confused as well. "What about snakes?" "Snakes," they both uttered. Bewilderment clouded their eyes. "Yes, Killian snakes." I began to explain my thoughts about snakes and how they were underutilized. "I like it," Strixstruma said slowly. "I like it a lot." "I love it," Lil explained. "Ground troops would certainly give us an edge." "And that gives me an idea," Strixstruma said. "Let's think of other animals that could help us." "Polar bears," I said, "but they sleep most of the winter, so they'd only be available to serve during Sophin-Isen at the earliest, and then through Nine Shaneen. Something flashed through my mind. The mangled talon of Helena, Moss's mother. I turned to Lil and Strixstruma. Moss's mother. She leads a commando unit called the Flying Leopards. It was so still I could have heard a plummel drop. "Supposing," I continued, "there were other ground troops linked with the Killian snakes, a unit of snow leopards." "They're pure muscle," Strixstruma said. "There were several around Little Hool. They can climb anything, sheer ice cliffs. Their paws are huge. I saw one knock a polar bear senseless, and they can swim." We began scratching madly on a birch bark. Moss arrived, and he worked through Twix time and on past noon, never taking a break. By first lavender, we had a rough organization for the Glock Speed. We had reworked the standardized size of a division in its normal subunits. While standard military division sizes were anywhere from 300 to 500 owls, our division was a scant 340 animals, composed of 2 regiments of 100 owls of mixed species, 50 Killian snakes, and 20 snow leopards. The division was further broke down into battalions, composed of 20 owls, 10 snakes, and 10 snow leopards each. Finally, there was the smallest unit made up of 12 owls, 5 snakes, and 5 leopard units. The unit was what I had first envisioned, a combat group that was light, fast, and flexible, both in the air and on the ground, and could shatter the very gizzard of the Orphan Maker. Chapter 23, Glocks plus Speed equals... All right now, Dylan snapped at the snaggle of the dozen snakes that coiled before her. I want to see those ESPs go to full extension. Cadet Jenna, I wasn't born yesterday. I might not be a straighted Volusian, but I've been diving with them for longer than you can remember. You can do twice what you're doing now. You want to fly? Yes, ma'am. Dylan reared up into a high, tight coil and hissed, showing a lot of fang. I mean, yes, Master Sergeant Dylan Lazuli. Well, you ain't getting off the ground at this rate. No owl will want to carry you. The more you spread your ESPs, the lighter you will become to help your owl get airborne. I watched these exercises every evening at First Lavender, even when I wasn't part of them. When the more advanced snake students were ready to embark on their first flight, Lil and I, along with Loki and a half a dozen other owls, became their vehicles. In the beginning, we owls were a bit nervous because the snakes were a new kind of weight. We had to learn how to balance ourselves and trim our wings to fit the burden. It was especially challenging when snakes went from a recumbent position to a full or half coil for strike. Their center of gravity shifted and could send us spinning. But once we learned how to cooperate, the rewards were bountiful. When the snakes expanded their ESPs, it could provide fantastic lift. In an odd way, it was similar to soaring, but there was no warm thermal involved. All right now, troops will make 2 passes with all cadet snakes in position. Number 1. On the 3rd pass, assume a half coil and a double blade axe head shape. 4th pass, coil to full position, maintaining the double blade, and extend your scale plates. Owls, you'll feel a slight lift, and remember, owls, the snakes are your co-pilots. If you need more lift, just say full extension. The progress the newly recruited snakes made was amazing. Their head transitions were smooth, they coiled up on the backs of the owls in flight, and they hardly ever wavered. We knew the snakes would be invaluable on the ground, but we hadn't been sure how they would do in flight. But they were learning fast. On another part of the field, more advanced snakes were engaging in target practice. Owls flew above snakes with dummies suspended from their talons. The snakes took aim and struck like lightning. They were also making great advancements with mid-air reloads. Great Grays and Snowies worked particularly well as reloaders, as they were the most deft in sidling up to the tiny owls that composed the Frostbeaks. But we were also now training eagle owls and barn owls as reloaders for larger weapons. Thor's quivers were proving quite revolutionary, and we knew they would prove invaluable in combat. Then Loki came up with the brilliant idea of not just reloading with weapons, but refueling with food in non-combat situations, such as reconnaissance missions. The small owls like elf, pygmy, and northern seawets were most often used for reconnaissance, burned up their energy sources faster than larger owls. They got hungrier quicker and fatigue set in, but if a snowy or a great gray could carry prey, just a tiny snow mouse or a rock monk, the smaller owls wouldn't have to stop to hunt. To build a division with creatures ranging from owls to snakes, and we hoped snow leopards, was not easy. One of the first things that I insisted on after I located Dylan, Hoke, and Gilda was that snakes had been given official ranks as members of the Killian League. The first started as master sergeants. Then we began the snake recruitment process in earnest. It might seem counterintuitive, but I purposely looked for the laziest snakes I could find, the snakes who were distracted in the honing pits or the excavators who were bored with knocking their heads against rock barrels. I sensed that these snakes were intelligent, but that they had never been truly challenged. My theory was simple, but it worked. The nest maids, who were completely stupefied from slurping up vermin in owl hollows, flocked to our recruitment stations. We instilled in them a sense of pride. Those first few weeks passed so fast, General Androcus might have appointed Moss, Lil, Loki, Blix, and me instructors, but we were learning as much as we were teaching. The second week, Moss was dispatched to fly to the far north, where the snow leopards lived on the ice cliffs above the Haragar Glacier. In addition to recruiting snow leopards, he was also charged with recruiting more large and powerful owls, eagle owls, northern hawk owls, if possible, great horned and great grays. Almost nightly, peregrine falcons flew in with postings from the front. We would watch them land and race immediately to General Articus's headquarters. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with an ice scimitar. A weird silence fell over the entire island each time a messenger landed. The only sound heard was the rasp of the Killian snakes in the honing pits. Bad news seeped out in bits and pieces from command headquarters. The front was moving closer. The colonel had been wounded, a celebrated general killed, and worst of all, another peaceful community razed, and hundreds of owlets left orphaned or dead. Every day, new troops mustered on the flight parade grounds of Darkfowl to go to the front and support the tactical squadrons engaged in battle. My mother had been called back to her unit and resumed her position as a commando with the Ice Daggers. Word had come in to me that a broody had been installed for my brother, Ifgar, who was proving to be a talonful. In the third week of training, an especially fast peregrine, Glennis, flew in at a truly amazing speed as I perched at the top of a silver fir tree where I'd been observing mid-flight reload exercises. I feared the worst when I saw how fast she was flying. What was it? Had disaster wiped out the entire brigade? It was as if the sky, the very clouds, parted for her. When I realized that she was flying directly to the crown of the silver fir where I perched, my first thought was that something had happened to Mum. I began to wilf. "It's good news," Glennis announced. "At least I think it is. I can't read code." "What?" "News from Mosh," she replied, handing me a white bark with a message written in hollow code. I read it. "Have recruited 6 snows." I knew at once he was speaking of snow leopards. This was extraordinary news. It was all coming together. For the first time, I had real hopes of our being ready by the spring offensive. We needed more snakes, as many as possible, and especially the really large ones. Gilda had told me there were some very large fellows at the eastern end of Stormfast. I had wanted to go check in on my little brother, Ifgar, and I thought I could scout for a few large snakes at the same time, so I went. Little did I dream that what I found on the scouting trip would have such an immense impact on the rest of my life. Dear reader, might you guess of whom I write? Her blue-green scales are glittering now as she makes her way into my hollow while I write these words. She is bringing me my dawn constitutional, a cup of milkberry tea laced with a dram of Bengal juice. I must go back and cross out the words blue-green. She would be furious at my lack of precision in calling her blue-green, or Glocks forbid, bluish or greenish. How well I remember her first words to me.